I lost everything because of my parents and their favorite daughter, but I discovered the dark secret that changed everything. My parents never wanted to support my business initiative, and they preferred to allocate all their savings to buy a new car for their spoiled daughter. That unfair decision was the trigger that led me to financial ruin, but they never imagined what would happen after all of that. My story begins a little over 2 years ago when I made the most important decision of my life, to fully dive into the world of entrepreneurship. For a long time, I had dreamed of creating my own agency specialized in graphic design and digital marketing strategies. I didn't want to keep being just another employee trapped in endless schedules without seeing results for myself, but to build something of my own that reflected my ideas and my effort. For several years, I worked in a renowned advertising agency where I absorbed as much knowledge as I could. I learned from big and small projects, from demanding clients and complicated campaigns. I made sure to perfect every skill that could serve me in the future, from the creative part of design to market strategy and client relationships. I was confident that I was ready to make my own way. At first, the feeling was electrifying. I had ambitious projects in mind, a list of potential clients I had already spoken to, and even a clear vision of how to differentiate myself from the competition. I was determined to invest all my savings in this adventure. I told myself that if I worked hard enough, nothing could go wrong. However, as it happens to most who dare to start a business, reality showed me that the road would be much harder than I had imagined. My savings began to vanish faster than I calculated, and the income one managed to generate barely covered part of the basic expenses. Each month, I felt how the money slipped through my hands. And even though I worked tirelessly, the results did not come at the pace I expected. There were nights when I stayed in front of the computer until dawn, convinced that this effort would soon pay off, but the market was ruthless and my business was still too small to stand out. The competition turned out to be more aggressive than I had anticipated. There were too many similar agencies, all with more experience and more resources. I tried to stand out with creativity, but in such a saturated sector, it was almost impossible to attract the attention of big clients. My brand was just beginning to make space for itself, and in the meantime, my debts grew. I felt I was against the wall, and that at any moment, all the sacrifice could collapse. In the midst of that anguish, I thought about the only thing that I believe could rescue me: asking my parents for help. Even though I'd always known I was not the favorite daughter, I had the hope that they would see my effort and decide to support me. Since I was a child, it had been clear to me that Valeria, my younger sister, was the one who occupied the privileged place in their hearts. She received the attention, affection, and opportunities that I was never given. I was always left in second place, invisible in front of the perfection they saw in her. Even so, in the middle of my desperation, I decided to take the risk. I spoke to them about my situation. I asked them for money with the hope that at least they would lend me part of what they had saved for so many years. I trusted they would see my determination, that they would realize that the only thing I needed was a boost to save what I had built with so much sacrifice. At that moment, I believed that, like any parent who sees their daughter fighting for a dream, they would not hesitate to reach out to me. When I sat down to talk to them, I tried to be as clear as possible. I told them in detail about the situation I was going through, the deadlines I had on me, the clients that were about to arrive, and the strategy one had designed to lift my business. I told them with my heart in my hand, if you lend me this money, I can save my company. I showed them my written plans, my income projections, every step I already had prepared. To me, it was obvious that this was an opportunity they could not let pass. They listened, or at least that's what it seemed. They gave me the typical response as always, "Well, think about it." It was a vague answer, one that sounded evasive to me. But even so, I decided to be patient. I wanted to believe that, like any parents who see their daughter making an effort and sacrificing herself, they would decide to support me. I had the illusion that this time it would be different, that they would stop seeing me as the second-class daughter. During that week, I lived with my heart in suspense. Every time the phone rang, I thought it would be them calling me to give me the good news. I imagined my mother's voice telling me, "Yes, daughter, we are going to help you. We trust you." I clung to that hope because I knew that, without that money, everything I had built would collapse. Remember that if you like my videos, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Finally, a week after that conversation, I received a call from my mother. I remember my heart began to beat strongly. My hands trembled as I answered, convinced that at last they would say yes. "We want to tell you that we have made a decision," my mother said with a solemn tone. At that moment, I felt a knot in my stomach, as if my life was about to change. But what came out of her lips hit me like a bucket of ice water. We decided to use the money to buy a new car for Valeria. I was left in silence, unable to believe what I had just heard. A mix of disbelief, rage, and pain completely invaded me. A car? A luxury car for my sister? She didn't even need it. She lived at home. She was barely 20 years old. She didn't work. And the only complaint she had in her life was depending on my parents to take her to the places she wanted to go. Meanwhile, I was giving my life for that business, working from sunrise to sunset, fighting to keep my project afloat, and yet they preferred to reward the perfect daughter, the one who never made an effort, who never asked for anything, because everything was given to her unconditionally. I tried to stay calm, but my voice came out loaded with contained fury. "What do you mean by that? Didn't you listen to me? I need that money to save my business." My mother tried to soften the situation, asked me to calm down, but it was impossible. Rage was boiling inside me. "It's just that Valeria is making an effort to find a job, and we thought that car would be an incentive for her," she told me. Those words echoed empty in my head. "She deserves it," again and again, as if there were knives stabbing into me. And I asked myself, what about me? Didn't I deserve anything after everything I had done, after every sacrifice? The most painful thing wasn't only my parents' choice, but the way they communicated it to me. They didn't even offer me an alternative. They didn't say, "We'll help you with another part of the money," or "We'll find a way to support you so you don't lose your business." No, they simply declared that Valeria was the priority at that moment, because according to them, the car would be some kind of motivation for her future. I felt how my heart broke into 1,000 pieces. Not only were they turning their backs on me at the most crucial moment of my life, but once again they confirmed that my sister, the favorite daughter, was the one who deserved all the attention and resources. I was left relegated, invisible, ignored as I had always been since I was little. That unfair preference wasn't new, but this time it hit me harder because my dream, my livelihood, my entire life was at stake. I had to swallow my rage, hold back the tears, and force myself to make a quick decision. If I didn't get money another way, my project would die. So, with the pain of having been rejected by those who should most support me, I turned to friends and colleagues. I asked them for loans, explained my situation, and although some lent me a hand, what I got was not enough. Despite those small supports, the situation kept getting worse. The lack of proper investment and the null support from my own family ended up taking its toll. In less than 6 months, the business I had built with so much effort collapsed into bankruptcy. My savings disappeared, debts began to pile up, and I felt I no longer had the strength to keep fighting against a storm that didn't seem to stop. When I finally accepted defeat, an absolute emptiness invaded me. Everything I had dreamed of, all the sacrifices, every sleepless night, everything had been reduced to nothing. What hurt me most was that my parents didn't even come close to give me a word of comfort. I didn't hear from them a simple, "We're sorry," or a "We'll try to help you another way." Nothing. While I was sinking, they celebrated Valeria's small achievements, as if they were extraordinary feats. They organized family gatherings to show off her new car, proudly telling everyone how happy she was with that motivation for her future, and they didn't even turn to see how their other daughter was falling apart in silence. It was at that point that I understood that, even though I wasn't looking for it, life itself was leading me toward a path of unexpected revenge. It wasn't something planned, but I was about to discover that justice, sooner or later, always finds a way to manifest itself. A couple of months after my company officially closed, when I had already resigned myself to the loss and was trying to rebuild my life, I heard a rumor that left me frozen. Someone close mentioned that Valeria was dating a guy named Roel. At first, I didn't give it much importance. I thought it was just another fleeting relationship, like so many others she had had. However, the tone in which they said it awakened my curiosity, and I began to pay more attention. Soon I discovered that Roll was not just any young man. After asking around here and there, I found out that he was linked to shady businesses, to large-scale illegal activities. There was talk of money laundering, influence peddling, and connections with powerful but corrupt people. My surprise was enormous. But what shocked me the most was realizing that Valeria was not only romantically involved with him, but also seemed to be increasingly immersed in that dark world. My sister, the model daughter, the perfect girl my parents always idealized, had secrets they refused to see. That revelation made me feel a mix of fear, indignation, and, in some way, a latent desire that, for once, the truth would come to light. If my parents had preferred to give everything to Valeria, then they would also have to face the consequences of their favorite daughter's decisions. I decided that if they didn't want to open their eyes, I would do it for them. I began to gather evidence little by little, with patience and determination. I saved suspicious conversations between Valeria and Roll, screenshots of text messages, photographs that implicated them in dubious places and situations. I kept everything filed, aware that sooner or later my parents would have to face the reality they were so determined to deny. The process wasn't easy. There were moments when I asked myself if I was crossing a line, if it was really right to expose what I was discovering. But then I remembered what had happened, how they let me fall into bankruptcy without lending me a hand, how they denied me their support at the most critical moment of my life, how they always put Valeria above me. And then I convinced myself, if I didn't do it, no one would. After a month, I decided it was time to show them the truth. I showed up at their house with all the evidence I had gathered. I carried printed messages between Valeria and Roll, the emails that proved her connection with illegal activities, and photographs that spoke for themselves. When I laid everything in front of them, the expression on their faces changed immediately. My mother, with a trembling voice, could barely say, "This can't be true." She tried to deny the obvious, to convince herself that her perfect daughter couldn't be involved in something like that. But the evidence was irrefutable. There was no escape. My parents, for the first time in a long time, couldn't close their eyes to reality. Valeria, the daughter who never needed anything, the one who had always been their pride, was deeply involved in a criminal network. My parents' reaction was devastating. My mother's face twisted between horror and disbelief, as if in a matter of seconds the entire pedestal she had always placed Valeria on collapsed. My father, on the other hand, didn't say anything at first. He just stared at the papers with wide-open eyes, as if trying to find some crack that would allow him to keep denying the truth. But there was no escape. The evidence spoke for itself. The blind love they had always given her turned into an unbearable blow of reality, I thought as I watched them. My mother kept repeating over and over that this couldn't be true, that surely there was a mistake, that someone was manipulating Valeria. But the more she denied it, the more obvious it became that there was no turning back. The disappointment, the fear, and the pain mixed on her face, and for the first time, I felt that they were experiencing what I had felt for years, the bitterest betrayal, only this time it came from the daughter they idealized. It wasn't a quick or planned revenge, but it was a sweet taste, a justice that arrived unexpectedly. Seeing how their illusions about Valeria collapsed, how they finally understood that she was not that perfect girl they defended, gave me a strange feeling of relief. For once, reality prevailed over false appearances. The blow didn't take long to grow bigger. Valeria began to be formally investigated. Everything she had achieved thanks to my parents' support, everything she flaunted with her new car and her comfortable life, began to collapse like a house of cards. The news of her relationship with Raoul and her possible involvement in illicit activities quickly spread among acquaintances, and shame became the new face of my family. My parents, who had always walked with their heads held high, showing Valeria off as their pride, now couldn't hold anyone's gaze. She, the favorite daughter, had become the cause of their greatest humiliation. I remember seeing them sitting in the living room, in silence, not knowing what to say or how to act, while I thought, this is what it feels like when the world you build on illusions collapses. While all this was happening, I began to rebuild my life. I decided to start my business again from scratch, this time without expecting anything from them, without depending on their support or validation. It was a painful and long process, but also liberating. For the first time, I understood that I didn't need their approval to move forward. My parents could remain sunken in the disappointment Valeria had caused them, but I was ready to rise again with my own strength. Sometime after I had shown those proofs, I decided to share my experience in a forum. The response I received was overwhelming. Hundreds of comments, messages of encouragement, and people who made me feel understood like never before. That was when I decided to write an update, telling what had happened in the 2 months following that revelation. After my parents' betrayal and the dramatic fall of my business, I found myself at the lowest point of my life. I thought I had hit rock bottom, and with that certainty came a kind of clarity. I had nothing left to lose. If I had sunk, the only thing left was to get up again, even if it was from zero. With that idea in my head, I made the decision to try again. Maybe not with the same business, nor in the same way, but I couldn't allow myself to stay defeated. I spent entire weeks reflecting, analyzing what I had done wrong, what I needed to improve, and how I could use the lessons learned to come back stronger. One night, after much thought, I sat at my desk and began to organize everything, from the type of clients I should target to the way I would structure my services. I had to reinvent myself, and this time, I would do it trusting only in myself. I knew I could no longer expect anything from my parents. Their support would never come, and Valeria would continue to be their priority no matter what. With that certainty in mind, I decided to restructure my design agency, focusing on a smaller niche, local small businesses that needed accessible but quality services. It was a humble beginning, but much more realistic and viable for me. The first days were hard. I had fear, insecurity, and a constant voice in my head reminding me of my failures. But despite that fear, I forced myself to move forward. Little by little, I began to get clients, modest businesses that needed help with their image and social media presence. The work was a lot, and the earnings at first barely covered my bills, but that feeling of independence was priceless. In the first month, I managed to stay afloat, pay my bills, and feel that not everything was lost. In the second month, the situation improved noticeably. Some of my clients recommended me to others, and suddenly I began to see real results. Not only was I generating income, but I was also regaining my confidence and dignity. And most importantly, I understood that although the road was difficult, I was not willing to give up. As the days went by, the idea of continuing to live under the same roof as my parents became unbearable. Even though I had my own space inside the house, I couldn't stop feeling trapped in that environment full of memories of indifference and favoritism. Every corner reminded me of the moment they turned their backs on me, of the coldness with which they decided to invest in Valeria instead of helping me. It was like living surrounded by a constant echo repeating, "You are not enough." So, after much thought, I made the decision to move out. It was a difficult decision because I had never left that house, but it was absolutely necessary to regain my peace of mind. I found a small apartment for rent, nothing luxurious or flashy, but it was mine. For the first time, I felt I had a place I could truly call my home, a space where I was not in anyone's shadow and where I could start building a new life. The day I entered with my boxes and closed the door behind me, an indescribable feeling of freedom overwhelmed me. I didn't have much, barely the essentials to live, but the peace of being alone, away from the constant comparison with Valeria, was a gift. At that moment, I understood that I had taken a huge step toward my independence, not only financially, but also emotionally. With time, I began to notice profound changes in myself. I felt stronger, more focused, and above all, more confident in my own decisions. Although the road was still difficult, I was certain that I was moving forward. I knew I still had many battles to fight, but the important thing was that I was no longer willing to give up, nor to keep begging for the support of those who never gave it to me. My parents, for their part, never called to ask how I was or to offer a sincere apology for what had happened. They continued behaving as always, celebrating Valeria, defending her tooth and nail, ignoring the pain they had caused me. But, to my surprise, it no longer affected me in the same way. I learned not to depend on their recognition or their empty words. Inside me, something had changed. I began to enjoy the process of growing by my own means. I decided to focus on what really mattered: my business, my stability, and my inner peace. Even though the relationship with them remained tense and distant, I understood that I no longer needed their validation. I was learning to be the owner of my destiny, and that freedom was a feeling I had never experienced. A year after having written that first update, many things had changed in my life. My business, although still small, was beginning to bear stable fruit, and I was learning to fully trust my abilities. However, in the family sphere, the situation took a turn I never imagined. Valeria, the same sister who had always been treated as the untouchable jewel of the family, crossed a line that even I found hard to believe. I found out that she had been little by little emptying my parents' accounts. For months, while they blindly trusted her, Valeria was transferring every cent of their savings to her own personal accounts. No one noticed until it was too late. The news hit me like a bucket of cold water. At first, I thought it was just an unfounded rumor, but soon the evidence began to come to light. It was true. Valeria had stolen all my parents' money, and, as if that wasn't enough, she left the country with what she had taken. She left them in total ruin, without a single peso, without any resource to cling to. The exemplary daughter, the perfect girl, had betrayed them in the cruelest way. The blow was devastating for my parents. They went from showing off Valeria and her new car to receiving letters from the bank demanding payment of the house mortgage. They were warned that if they didn't pay the pending installments, they would lose the house in an immediate foreclosure process. Desperate, not knowing what else to do, they called me. I remember that day as if it were yesterday. The phone rang, and when I answered, I heard my mother's broken voice. Between sobs, she explained the situation and asked me for help. They wanted me to lend the money to settle the debt, and thus avoid losing the house. They were asking me, once again, to be the one to rescue them, as I had always done in silence. But that call awoke in me a mix of intense emotions: rage, sadness, disbelief. How could they dare to ask me for help after everything they had done to me? They knew perfectly well what Valeria had taken from me, how they denied me their support when I needed it most, and yet they expected me to sacrifice myself again for them. At that moment, I understood something key. I could no longer carry the role of the sacrificial daughter. Not this time. I remember that call from my parents as a breaking point. With a broken voice, my mother begged me to help them, to lend them money to save the house that was about to be foreclosed. They told me that only I could rescue them, that they depended on me in that critical moment. Hearing those words provoked a storm of conflicting emotions, a mix of fury, sadness, and even irony. How was it possible that, after having denied me their support when I needed it most, now they had the audacity to ask me for help? I clearly remember the times when their indifference left me ruined, the moments when they closed the doors on me to give everything to Valeria. And now, when they were on the verge of collapse because of her, they called me, the forgotten daughter, to save them. For years, they had made me feel invisible, always relegated behind the perfect girl. And suddenly, they expected me to sacrifice myself once again for them. That call made me realize something very powerful. I could no longer carry the role of the sacrificial daughter, the one who always gives and never receives anything in return. For the first time, I understood that I had the right to say no. And so I did. With all the serenity I could gather, I explained to them that I could not help them. I told them I didn't have enough money to cover a debt of that size, and beyond that, I made it clear that I wasn't willing to be their savior again. Making that decision wasn't easy, because a part of me still wanted their recognition. But another part, the most wounded, knew it was time to set a definitive limit. The bank, as expected, had no compassion. The foreclosure was carried out quickly, and my parents lost the house they had lived in all their lives. I remember my mother's later call, crying inconsolably, asking me for forgiveness too late. But it was useless. What they had done in the past could not be undone, and I was not going to carry the consequences. While Valeria enjoyed herself in another country with the money she stole, my parents were left homeless, facing the reality of their own decisions. It hurt me to see them suffer, but deep down I understood it was necessary. They had to face the consequences of having ignored my efforts and of having placed Valeria on a pedestal. For the first time, I wasn't the one carrying the guilt or the responsibility of solving their problems. This time, the weight of their actions fell directly on them. As the months went by, my parents tried to adapt to their new reality. After losing the house, they ended up living in the home of some friends who took them in out of pity. They had nothing left. No savings, no stability, no place of their own where they could feel safe. Our relationship was deeply damaged. Although I tried to keep in touch with them, it was not the same. The wound that had opened with everything that happened seemed impossible to close. For my part, my business kept growing, little by little but firmly. I did not support them financially, and although a part of me felt guilt, another stronger part felt proud of having come so far without their help. I understood that I had always carried a weight that did not belong to me. Being the sacrificial daughter, the one who always gave in, the one who was left with nothing so that others could have everything. And at last, I had left that role behind. From all of that, I learned an invaluable lesson. At the end of the day, my well-being had to be my priority. I could not continue giving myself to those who never gave me anything in return, nor wear myself out for people who made me feel invisible. I had to think about my future and the life I wanted to build for myself, far from the emotional chains that tied me to my family. A few more months passed, and then I wrote a third update. By that time, weeks had already gone by since my parents had lost the house, and although it hurt to see them in that situation, I felt a peace I had never experienced before. I had made a difficult decision, but I knew it was the right one. At first, I confess I was overwhelmed by mixed feelings: guilt, rage, sadness. Seeing my parents with nothing created a void in my chest, but I also understood that they had to learn to live with the consequences of their actions. For years, they had closed their eyes to my efforts. They had chosen Valeria over me in everything, and now it was their turn to face reality without me stepping in to save them. The situation with Valeria was the final blow. After some time, the police managed to locate her in another country and arrested her. Not only had she emptied my parents' accounts, but it was also discovered that she was involved in multiple frauds abroad, using the stolen money to live the life of luxury she had always desired. The golden girl they had defended so much ended up revealing who she really was. My parents, devastated, still tried to justify her. They told me that, despite everything, she is still our daughter. And at that moment, it became clearer to me than ever. Nothing was going to change. They would continue defending her even if she had destroyed them. I, on the other hand, no longer needed their approval or their crumbs of affection. I had my life, my business, and above all, my freedom. The news of Valeria's arrest spread like wildfire, and for my parents, it was a devastating blow. That daughter they had defended with tooth and nail, the one they always justified and exalted as an example, had been exposed in front of the whole world as a fraudster. What struck me the most was not the fact itself, but the way they reacted. Instead of accepting what had happened, of facing the reality of her actions, what they did was ask me to feel compassion for her. They told me that, despite everything, Valeria was their daughter and that I should forgive her. That even if she had committed crimes, she was still part of the family and that somehow I should support her. Those words pierced me like knives. It was incredible that even after being robbed, betrayed, and humiliated by their golden girl, they still defended her as if she were a victim. That moment made me realize how deep the favoritism toward Valeria really was. Not even such an obvious crime could topple the pedestal they had put her on. And although it hurt, it also gave me clarity. I would no longer compete for a love that was never given to me equally. I cannot continue expecting my parents to be different. Meanwhile, my life was taking another course. My business continued growing steadily. I had managed to consolidate a stable portfolio of clients, and I began to expand my services by hiring people to help me. What started as a small project, almost extinguished by the lack of support, was turning into a solid company, built solely with my effort and perseverance. It wasn't easy, but every closed contract, every satisfied client, was a reminder that I didn't need anyone to move forward. For the first time, I felt that my success depended exclusively on me and that I could sustain myself without the shadow of my parents or the constant comparison with Valeria. On a personal level, I experienced a profound transformation. I understood that financial independence was important, but emotional independence was even more so. I learned not to put my happiness or stability in the hands of people who did not value who I was. I stopped waiting for recognition that would never come and began to enjoy the fact of being at peace with myself. Looking back, I realized that I couldn't change my parents or my sister. They would continue being the same, trapped in a cycle of favoritism and manipulation. But I no longer needed their approval. I had my life, my company, and most importantly, the certainty that I was the owner of my destiny. After Valeria's arrest, my parents were left completely devastated. The news that their spoiled daughter was involved in international frauds hit them with the same force with which they had destroyed me years ago. The most surprising thing was that, even then, they kept trying to justify her. For them, Valeria was not a criminal, but a victim of circumstances. They told me I should have compassion, that in the end she was still their daughter, and that I shouldn't turn my back on her. That speech made me feel sick inside. I couldn't believe that, after everything that had happened, after she left them in ruins, after she ran away with all their money, after she abandoned them to their fate, they still defended her as if she were innocent. Instead of opening their eyes, they decided to cling to the illusion that Valeria was special, unique, irreplaceable. For me, that was the final point. I understood that nothing they did or said would change the way they had always acted. My parents are going to keep protecting Valeria until the end, even if that meant denying reality. And I, finally, stopped expecting them to be different. Meanwhile, my life kept transforming. Over time, my business not only managed to stabilize, but also began to grow with a strength I had never imagined. I went from working alone, with fear and with the bare minimum, to forming a small team. I hired talented people who believed in my vision, and little by little we began to expand the agency's services. It was no longer just about surviving, but about building something solid and lasting. Each new client, each closed contract, filled me with satisfaction because it was living proof that I had achieved everything without depending on my parents. I was not only reaching financial independence, I was also achieving something much bigger, emotional independence. I felt free, light, without chains tying me to anyone's approval. I had left behind that constant need to be recognized by my parents. Now I understood that my worth was not measured by what they thought of me, nor by the comparison with Valeria. My happiness depended solely on what I was capable of building, and that discovery gave me a strength I had never felt before. With time, I began to understand something essential. My parents were never going to change. For years, I believed that if I worked hard enough, if I proved my achievements, someday they would look at me with the same pride with which they always looked at Valeria. But I was wrong. They would continue being the same, trapped in a blind favoritism that even led them to ruin. Valeria wouldn't change either. Even though she was arrested and faced charges for her frauds, she remained the same manipulative person she had always been. Throughout her life, she found ways to twist reality so that everything revolved around her, and my parents never stopped falling into her games. I understood it clearly. I could not expect my happiness to depend on someone else, much less on a family that had turned their backs on me so many times. That realization freed me. For the first time, I felt at peace with myself, without that need for approval I had dragged along since childhood. I stopped waiting for a "we're proud of you" or a "you made it on your own." Their silence no longer hurt me because I discovered I didn't need it. My life was in my hands, and I was the only one responsible for my destiny. It was then that I decided to look forward without chains. I focused completely on my business, on making it grow, on turning it into a project that filled me with satisfaction. Little by little, The agency stopped being that small and fearful venture and became a stable job, with clear goals and a future that depended solely on my effort and dedication. Not everything was perfect, of course. There were days of extreme exhaustion, of demanding clients, of projects that seemed endless. But I faced each challenge with a new energy, with the certainty that I was doing it for myself and not to prove anything to anyone else. That gave me an indescribable freedom. When I wrote that last update, I felt deeply grateful to those who had supported me from the outside, to all the people who reminded me that I was worth more than my parents made me believe. Today, I don't know what the future holds, but I am clear that I am the owner of my life, my decisions, and my path. And after everything I've lived, that certainty is the greatest triumph I could achieve. Remember that if you like my videos, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.